Something felt off the moment my son-in-law suggested we celebrate at the notary's office. Not at a restaurant, not at my house. At the notary's office where I had just signed over the estate to my daughter. I want to be clear about something before I get into all of this. I am not a suspicious man by nature. I spent 34 years working for the city of Calgary, managing public works contracts. I dealt with budgets, contractors, union reps, city councilors who smiled at you on Tuesday and stabbed you in the back on Wednesday. After all that, I thought I had a decent radar for dishonesty. But I am also 67 years old, and I will admit that when it comes to family, I let my guard down. I always have. My wife used to say that was my best quality and my worst one, both at the same time. She passed away 2 years ago, breast cancer. We were married 41 years, and losing her nearly finished me. My daughter, Cora, was my anchor through all of it. She drove up from Edmonton every second weekend while her mother was sick. She sat in the hospital room and held my wife's hand and sang to her softly when the pain got bad. When it was over, Cora stayed for 2 weeks and helped me sort through everything. The paperwork, the phone calls, the thank you cards for the flowers people sent. She did all of it without being asked. Her husband, Nathan, I was less sure about. He was polite enough. He shook hands firmly and called me "sir," and always remembered to bring wine when they came for dinner. But there was something about the way he talked about money. Not greedily, nothing that obvious, more like a man who thought about it constantly and had trained himself not to show it. A small tell, the way his eyes shifted whenever property values came up in conversation. I noticed it, filed it away, and chose to say nothing because Cora loved him, and I respected that. When my brother passed away last spring and left me his property in Canmore, everything changed. My brother Raymond had no children. He had a modest bungalow on a quarter-acre just outside of town, bought in 1987 for $80,000. By the time he died, it was assessed at just over $1.3 million. He left it to me in his will, along with a small RRSP and some savings. I was not expecting it. Raymond and I had not been close for many years, a falling out over something stupid in the 90s that neither of us ever fully resolved. And then he got sick before we had the chance. I inherited the property feeling more grief than joy. It was a complicated inheritance. I decided to give the Canmore property to Cora. She and Nathan had been renting in Edmonton for 6 years and could not seem to get ahead of the market no matter how hard they tried. The property was mine to give. Cora was the only family I had left. It made sense. I arranged everything through a notary in Calgary named Mr. Park, a quiet, careful man I had used before when I updated my own will. We set the appointment for a Thursday morning. Cora came down from Edmonton the night before and stayed with me, just the two of us, and we had dinner together and talked about her mother the way we sometimes do, carefully, fondly, like handling something we love that might break. Nathan drove down early the next morning and met us at Mr. Park's office. The signing took about 40 minutes. Cora cried a little, which made me cry a little, which made Mr. Park pretend to study his documents very carefully for a moment. When it was done, Nathan shook my hand and said, "Thank you, Gordon. This is incredibly generous." He said it the right way. He looked me in the eye. I felt good about it. Then he suggested we stay and celebrate, right there in the waiting room of the notary's office. He had brought a small bottle of sparkling apple cider in his bag, he said, because he had wanted to mark the occasion. I thought it was an odd detail, the forethought of it, but I told myself he was just trying. Cora seemed touched. She got 3 paper cups from the water cooler in the corner, and Nathan poured. Mr. Park had stepped away to make copies of the completed documents. His assistant, a young woman named Diane, was at the front desk finishing something on her computer. Nathan handed me a cup and raised his own. "To Raymond," he said, "and to you, Gordon." My phone rang. It was my neighbor, calling about a repair crew that was supposed to come by the house that morning. I stepped outside to take the call. I was gone maybe 4 minutes. When I came back in, Diane was standing near the reception desk, and she looked at me in a way I still think about. Not alarmed, not panicked. Careful, the way someone looks when they have decided something and are not yet sure if they should say it out loud. She waited until Nathan had gone to the washroom and Cora was reading something on her phone. Then she walked over to me and spoke quietly. "Mr. Calvert," she said, "I don't want to overstep, but while you were outside, I saw your son-in-law open something in his jacket pocket and put it in your cup. I don't know what it was. I just thought you should know before you drink that." I looked at her for a moment. I looked at the cup in my hand. "Which one is mine?" I asked. "The one closest to you, on the window sill?" I nodded. I thanked her. I set the cup down. When Nathan came back from the washroom, I told them both I wasn't feeling well, that the stress of the morning had caught up with me and I needed some water before anything else. I went to the cooler and got myself a fresh cup. I drank that instead. Nathan watched me for a half second, then looked away. We left the office around 11:30. In the parking lot, Cora hugged me for a long time. Nathan shook my hand again. I told them I would call that evening. I drove home and sat in my kitchen for a long time without doing anything. I want to tell you that I immediately called the police or that I confronted Nathan that afternoon. I didn't. I sat in my kitchen and I tried to figure out what I actually knew. A young woman I had met twice had seen something she could not identify. Nathan could have been putting something else in his pocket. He could have been adjusting his jacket. Maybe she misread the whole thing. I'm a man who spent his career dealing in facts, and the fact was that I had no proof of anything except a feeling, but the feeling did not go away. I called my doctor the next morning and described the situation without using names. I asked him what someone would use if they wanted to incapacitate a person without killing them. Something that might make a transfer of signature seem urgent, or make someone confused enough to re-sign documents or update a power of attorney. He was quiet for a moment. He said there were several possibilities. He said if I had genuine concerns, I should contact the RCMP. He asked if I was all right. I told him I was working on it. Over the next 2 weeks, I started paying attention in a different way. I asked my lawyer, a woman I had used for years, to tell me quietly if anyone had made inquiries about the Canmore property or about my will. She called me back 3 days later. A man had contacted her office claiming to be acting on my behalf, asking about the process for updating a power of attorney. She had told him she would need to speak to me directly, and he had not called back. She did not have a name, only a callback number that traced to a prepaid phone. I kept that information. Then Cora called me on a Sunday. She sounded strained. She said Nathan had been pushing her to have me update my will to name him as executor instead of my lawyer. He had been making the argument for weeks, she said. He thought it was more practical, more efficient. She called me because something in her gut told her to, she said. She didn't know what to do with the feeling. I told her to come down to Calgary, just herself. She came the following weekend. We sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea, and I told her everything from the beginning. Diane's words, the phone call to my doctor, the inquiry to my lawyer, the prepaid number. I laid it out like a contractor's report, item by item, and I watched my daughter's face. She went very still. That is the only way I can describe it. Not shocked, not crying. Still, the way a person goes, still when something they had been half afraid of for a long time turns out to be true. I found a withdrawal, she said eventually, 3 months ago, $12,000. He said it was for a truck repair. I never saw the truck in the shop. We sat with that for a while. I want to be honest about this part because I think it matters. Part of me wanted to protect Cora from what came next. She had built a life with this man. She had a lease in his name and shared bank accounts and friends who were his friends first. Dismantling that was going to cost her something real. But she was the one who said it first. She said, "Dad, I need to know the truth about who I married." And I heard my wife in that. My wife never looked away from hard things. She taught Cora the same. I contacted the RCMP the following Monday. I brought my lawyer. I brought Diane, who agreed to give a statement. The officer we spoke to was straightforward and calm. He explained what they could and couldn't act on without more evidence. He suggested carefully that if Nathan were to make another move, it would help to have documentation in place. I went home and I set a trap. Not a complicated one. I told Nathan in a phone call. I made sure to keep friendly and ordinary that I was thinking of adding a codicil to my will. I said I had been advised by my lawyer to consider naming a family member as a co-executor, and that I valued his judgment. I said I had an appointment that Thursday, and asked if he wanted to come with me to discuss it. He said yes immediately. On Thursday morning, we met at my lawyer's office. Nathan brought a folder. Inside the folder was a draft power of attorney document he had prepared himself, or had someone prepare, that would give him sole signing authority over my financial accounts and property, including the Canmore transfer, which he had worded in a way that would have effectively let him sell the property without Cora's knowledge. My lawyer reviewed it while I sat there and watched Nathan watch her. The RCMP officer was in the adjoining room. What happened next was not dramatic in the way it sounds when I describe it now. There was no shouting. Nathan was very quiet when the officer came in. He asked for a lawyer. He got one. The process from there took several months, the way these things do in Canada, carefully and slowly through the courts, with hearings and disclosures and motions I did not fully understand. My lawyer understood them. I paid her to understand them. Nathan was charged with fraud and attempted theft over $5,000 under the criminal code. The power of attorney document he had brought, combined with the inquiry made to my lawyer's office and Diane's statement, was enough. He pleaded guilty on a reduced charge 8 months later and received a conditional sentence with 2 years of supervised probation and a restitution order for the $12,000 Cora had found missing from their account. He never spent a night in jail. I will not pretend that sat easily with me. But Cora filed for divorce the week after he pleaded guilty. She did it herself, directly, without asking me how I felt about it or whether I approved. I was proud of her in a way I could not quite say out loud. She moved her things out of the Edmonton apartment and came to stay with me for a month while she figured out what came next. We had a lot of evenings at that kitchen table. I want to say something about Diane, because I have thought about her a great deal. She was 24 years old and she was at work doing her job, and she saw something she was not certain about, and she said something anyway. That is not a small thing. Most people find a reason not to say something. It is easier. It costs you less. She could have told herself she was imagining it, that it was none of her business, that getting involved in a family matter at her workplace was not worth the trouble. She said something anyway, quietly, directly, without drama. I sent a letter to Mr. Park's office after everything was resolved. In the letter, I thanked him for running the kind of office where someone like Diane felt safe enough to say something like that. I also enclosed a personal note for Diane along with a check for $5,000. She sent me a handwritten card back that I still have in my desk drawer. She said she had used part of it to help her younger brother cover tuition for his second year at SAIT. That made me glad in a way I didn't expect. I also transferred the Canmore property properly and cleanly into Cora's name alone, with the trust structure my lawyer set up to ensure it stayed protected. Cora sold it 18 months later when the market was right and used the money as a down payment on a small house in Okotoks, not far from me. She has a garden now. She grows tomatoes and zucchini and more kale than any one person needs. I go over for dinner on Sundays. We eat and watch the news and argue mildly about the flames, and she sends me home with containers of whatever she has made too much of. My wife would have loved Okotoks. She always said she wanted to be somewhere you could see the mountains from the kitchen window. I do not tell Cora that because I do not want to make her sad, but I think about it every time I sit at her table. There is something I keep coming back to, and I will try to say it plainly. I am 67 years old. I worked hard. I saved carefully. I paid into the system the way you are supposed to, and at the end of it, I had something modest to leave behind. And someone who called me family tried to take it from me in a quiet room while my daughter wasn't looking. What I've learned, sitting with this for the better part of 2 years now, is that trust is not the same as love. You can love someone and still not be able to trust them. And you can trust a 24-year-old woman you have met twice who has nothing to gain and everything to lose, simply because she decided that doing the right thing mattered more than staying comfortable. That is not a small lesson for an old man to learn, but I am glad I learned it while I was still here to do something about it. I think about Diane a lot, not in a sentimental way, just honestly. She was 24 years old, and she was at work, and she saw something that made her uncomfortable, and instead of looking back at her screen and letting it go, she walked across a waiting room and told the truth to a stranger. That is such a small thing when you write it out, and it is everything. What Nathan did not count on was that honesty still exists in ordinary places. He had spent enough time calculating, I think, that he had started to believe most people do the math the same way he did. What's in it for me? What's the risk? Why bother? He brought a folder of forged documents to a notary's office because he believed the people around him were either too distracted or too self-interested to notice. He was wrong about Diane. He was wrong about Cora, too, in the end. I have thought a lot about what made Cora do what she did. She called me that Sunday not because she had proof of anything. She called because something felt wrong, and she trusted that feeling enough to say it out loud. That takes more courage than people give it credit for. It is easy to ignore a feeling when the alternative is having to look directly at something you would rather not see. Cora looked anyway. She has her mother's honesty. I will carry that with me for the rest of my life. And I think about my own part in this. I was the one who chose not to look too closely at Nathan year after year because Cora loved him and because it was easier. I saw the way his eyes shifted when property values came up. I noticed. I filed it away and moved on. I am not saying I should have acted on a look, but I have learned that paying attention is not the same as being suspicious. Attention is just respect for reality. You can love someone fully and still see them clearly. I wish I had learned that distinction sooner. What I know now is that the three things that actually held this situation together were not luck. They were character, judgment, and the willingness to keep going even when it was hard. Diane had the moral clarity to speak up when it would have been far easier to stay quiet. Cora had the discernment to read a situation honestly, even when doing so cost her a marriage and a shared life she had spent years building. And I had to find the patience to act carefully and slowly, to build a case rather than react, to let the truth come out in a way that actually stuck. None of that was dramatic. All of it was hard. Raymond left me that property in Canmore, and I inherited something else along with it, a chance to find out what the people around me were actually made of. Some of what I found was painful. Some of it, like Diane's note in my desk drawer and Cora's garden in Okotoks, was better than I deserved. I am 67 years old, and I have learned that the people who do right by you are usually the ones who had every reason not to and chose differently anyway. Hold on to those people. They are not common.